The National Broadcasting Commission has been barred from imposing fines on broadcast stations in the country. A federal high court in Abuja held that the commission lacked the powers to impose sanctions on any broadcast station, as it is not a court of law. While the court set aside the 500,000 naira fines imposed on 45 broadcast stations, each in March of 2019. While the court further held that the NBC code, which gives the commission the power to impose sanctions, is in conflict with Section 6 of the Constitution, which vests judicial power in the court of law. The Nigerian Guild of Editors has commended the ruling, saying that the judgment has vindicated its position that the NBC could not appropriate the constitutional responsibility of the judiciary arm of government.
Well, joining us now is Deputy Dean of Postgraduate Schools at Beige University, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, of course, right person to have this conversation with.
No better person.
Prof, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you.
So let's just look at the judgment straight up. It says, not your place to fine, basically. It says it's in conflict with Section 6 of the Constitution. And it says, you know what, you can sanction, but it's not for you to fine. Hand it over to the court. So what does this say really about the NBC and how it's been operating?
Well, at first I think it's a welcome development. It's a kind of relief, for broadcast media houses, because in the last couple of weeks, it's been an attempt to muffle, to strangulate these stations, against the background of the new reality that is emerging. The print media is on a decline because of the rise of digital and social media. In the last 2 decades, we have seen many print media organizations going down. The one that the jury that seems to be standing, as the case could be, is the broadcast media, because of its ability to produce video, and of course its audiovisual effects, So we're enjoying the broadcast media, still standing, still thriving, surviving in a difficult economy, And again, we are now having problem with regulation through the instrumentality of NBC. So the court coming in now is a welcome relief, and of course citing Section 6 and 36 of the Constitution that what NBC is doing is actually contrary to this section, including the African Charter on Peoples and Human Rights. Welcome development overall, and I think it's something that is worth celebrating, because the way we're going, it was going to get to a stage where NBC will start to choose editors or appoint editors into the newsrooms of broadcast stations. And there's so much that a presenter can do. There are rules guiding presentations, and if NBC, if they were proper in their judgment, once they realize that the presenter has tried in difficult circumstances, I think the onus should have just been them to show understanding and not maybe cave into the pressure tactics of some other agencies of government, like we often suspect. Because it's not all the time that we think NBC is acting alone. They're probably acting, through the instructions from some other agencies that you and I will probably know, and we may not want to talk about.
And that's why there's the very strong call for the NBC to be independent. But what do you think the framers of the NBC Act had in mind, from the get-go? Were they wrong in the first place? Or what exactly was their intendment?
Yes, sometimes when these regulations are being thought about, it might just be based on the reality at the moment, but life is replete with changing realities, changing circumstances. The onus is on the one interpreting it at the moment, at that moment in time, for them to be circumspect, for them to put things in proper perspective before applying sanctions, And of course, if you bring in a guest to now you are talking to me, there's only very little you can say to regulate me. You can only say, I'm being too absolute, I'm being too hard, I'm using hard words. But I can rush some terrible words that can put you, that should rather put me in trouble and not necessarily your station. But NBC toss around that pod issue, forgetting that first you are supposed to be a platform for the contestation of ideas. It doesn't matter what the level of the decibel. All we have to do is to understand the circumstance that is making individuals to talk. But government come with this mentality. I mean, this atmosphere of governmentality. We've got the power. We have to rule over them. We have to reign over them. We have to punish them, which is actually very problematic. And that's why we're asking our leaders to be moderated, in the application of these laws, because it can stifle organization. Most broadcast stations that have been sanctioned so far, are private organizations, struggling in a difficult economy.
Absolutely.
And again, you are now sanctioning them, arbitrarily as the case
Professor, something you touched on when you talked about influence of NBC and some of its decisions.
Yeah.
Let's get a soundbite from the former Director General of the Nigerian Television Authority. Speaking of Professor Tony Iradia, I will come back to you and continue the conversation.
Anybody who wants NBC to do the right thing, let's start from the starting point. Let's have an independent NBC. You cannot recruit people and put them under the minister and expect them to be able to be independent and to be able to follow what you want them to do. So I think that is the real problem. The problem is about the foundation. Do we have an independent NBC? If we have an NBC that is answerable to a politician, how can that NBC be independent? How can it do what it would have loved to do? There are certain things that make one believe that some of these things we are seeing are not ordinary. For example, the NBC has fined Channels Television, and they have cited the National Broadcasting Code 6th edition. Now, how can they cite that edition which a court has already outlawed? A court has said that code is not legal, so you can't be citing it. Not only that, we cannot allow an NBC that is an administrative body to be making judicial decisions. It is not the place of NBC to fine somebody, but probably to take someone to court to say you have done the wrong thing, this is what the law says, and then the court can determine. Because even when an administrative body has authority to do certain things that have to do with rights of people, that administrative body has an obligation to act in accordance with the principles of natural justice, in which case you must hear the other side. You must not be a judge in your own cause.
There you go.
You
can't be a judge in your own court. Further reiterating the point made earlier about the need for, he's saying, Tony Iradia is saying that the fundamental thing is the independence of the NBC. So how do you even achieve that?
Professor Tony Iradia, that's an oracle in many rights, so I cannot agree more with him. Very obviously so, that the independence of NBC is also questionable. And we have seen in recent times too that left to them, they would have been restrained, slightly restrained. But we know they are acting under the pressure tactics of some agencies and some political leaders. Some agencies are there, government agencies, they might have been well-meaning, but sometimes we also know that they can be ultra-sensitive to seemingly innocent pronouncement. They interpret it in different ways, and because they don't want to directly interfere, they're not coming through the appropriate government agencies that seem to be in charge, of that area, and asking them to deal. And that's what we see NBC reacting sometimes. What about the Ministry of Information? Several times we have also seen the minister coming out openly, to say that, some pronouncements will be dealt with, some kind of interviews, government will intervene, and we'll know where else are they going to intervene, if not through the NBC. So this is just the courts playing the expected role that we expect, that we always hope that it should play, defending the defenseless, the last hope of the common man. And we are seeing it happening because the media, the private media particularly, is helpless in this circumstance. We have seen instances where public media should have been sanctioned, but they carefully avoided them. Concentrating on struggling private media.
Especially during the last elections, there were lots of calls, really. But you know what? As a professor of communications, we need to ask about this judgment, really. Put that side by side, the NBC Act, of course, the laws establishing the NBC. Some would say probably there was some sort of faulty interpretation somewhere. But in your opinion, where do you think the NBC got it wrong from the beginning?
I think it's about implementation. It's about the absence of willpower, to stand, and resist the pressure tactics of some powers that be. And this can be very difficult in our kind of society where most of the time you are appointed by somebody and you want to hold that person in reverence. You want to defer to that person. You don't want to sin as being asking against the will of that person. And sometimes some officials even overdo these things. They become very, very sycophantic, but in doing that, they are affecting the cause, the processes, and the essences of some other organizations and sectors of the society.
Fantastic.
In this case, the broadcast stations.
Fantastic. Sorry, needed to cut in there. Now, it doesn't take away the fact that the NBC is a regulator. How does it carry out its function without offending the law, without overreaching itself?
Look, the average broadcast station...
Because it must carry out sanctions.
The average broadcast station is socially responsible. They understand, their mission, their vision, their cardinal objectives. Before you sanction, there's something you call consultation. To what extent will you say the NBC has been holding consultative meetings with these stations? There are organizations, there are bodies through which you can talk to these organizations. They are also, it shouldn't just be wielding the big stick all the time. What about consultation? Letting them know that sometimes you might be crossing the line, if you permit so and so. And do not forget what I said earlier. Most of the time, you are probably, what you can do, you can do so much really, but your power is limited. I can decide to use expletives, unprintable words while I'm talking now. The best you can do is to tell me that's a strong word, but I will have done the damage. And at the end of the day, I'm putting you into trouble. So were you supposed to slap me or hold my lips while I'm talking? So that's what I'm saying. There's little you can do in those circumstances. And that's what I'm saying, that NBC should have this understanding and not be wielding the big stick. But mercifully, the court has come to
yes, indeed.
Our rescue. Yeah.
We'll have to leave it there. Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, of course, is the Deputy Dean, Postgraduate School at the Bayes University. Thank you, as always, for joining us.
My pleasure.